Let's take a look at the 2023 budget. Now, Jeremy Hunt had an interesting conundrum, interesting and challenging, by the way, because he's got to focus on the election that's coming up in the very near future. On top of that, he's got challenges in terms of the cost of living crisis, in terms of the fact that we may have a recession, inflation, interest rates, so it's all up in the air. Now that on the back of the previous mini budget from 𝐓𝐡𝐞 which was a car crash, an entire disaster, and I might go into that a bit more later on if we have time, makes this a very interesting budget. So as you may know, politicians love alliteration and they love buzzwords and they love catchphrases, whether it's build back better, whether it's get Brexit done, whether it's take back control. Jeremy Hunt has his everywhere, enterprise, employment and education. So those are kind of his 4 key focuses. Let's see how well he's done. So to start with a real positive, huge reform in my view on pensions. So you have a lifetime allowance and you have an annual allowance. The annual allowance used to be £40,000 per year. So anybody who contributes up to £40,000 into their pension gets tax relief. So if you're a basic rate taxpayer, you get 20% relief. So if you contribute £40,000, for example, you have tax relief of £8,000 or tax savings of £8,000. That's been now changed to 60,000, so you can contribute £60,000 every single year into your pension. So the £8,000 saving becomes £12,000. If you're a high rate taxpayer, you would save on the old figure of £40,000, £16,000. On the new figure of £60,000, you've got £24,000. So that's really good news. In terms of the lifetime allowance, which was £1,073,000 to be precise, well, that's been lifted. There's no more lifetime allowance. So that's really good news, especially for people who are making a good amount of profit. You can contribute obviously £60,000 into your pension. If you're getting quite close to the lifetime allowance, you now don't have one, so you can continue contributing. And of course, if you got to the lifetime allowance, there were additional taxes to pay which don't matter right now. Now Jeremy Hunt says that's mainly to address the challenges that they have in the NHS with doctors are unable to contribute because they've got to the lifetime allowance, and to encourage them to stay on working and contributing towards their pension. But he's been quite generous. He's opened it across the board for anybody and everybody. Now there are some people who say he's making it easier for the wealthy and the richer, and that's an argument to be had. Although I have an interest and a keen interest in politics, I am going to stay away from offering any political commentary. If you want that, there's plenty of news channels out there who will give you both sides or all sides of the argument. I'm just going to be talking to you about the facts. So if you don't have a pension, you may want to consider having a pension. If you want that, I don't offer investment advice. You can obviously speak to an IFA and they'll be able to guide you and show you what the options are in terms of the different pensions you can have. But I think the pension regime that he's changed is very good, and I think it's going to allow more people to invest more money into their pensions, and therefore when they look at retiring, they should have a bigger fund to keep them going until the end of their days. So pensions, thumbs up. The next biggie is capital allowances. So we had the super deduction of 130%, which was due to end 31st of March 2023. Now the Chancellor, I think, has come up with something even better. So he's got this 100% full expensing for the next 3 years, which ends in 31st of March 2026. So where you will get 18% capital allowances, you can now obviously expense the whole lot. On top of that, for your special rate pool, where you only had a 6% writing down allowance, you get 50%. So that's really generous of the Chancellor. Alongside that, we've got something called the annual investment allowance, which was increased from 200,000 up to £1 million back in 2019. That was due to expire on the 31st of March 2023. He's now also made that permanent, which means basically if you invest in plant machinery and equipment, then you can claim 100% in your first year. So that's the challenge for you now, is to obviously do the numbers to make sure that you claim the right allowances in the right way. And I'm not going to focus too much on that in this particular video here. I'll make a different video for you on that, just to kind of go through some examples and figures to assist you. But this is really good news especially if you're into service accommodation, for example, because you can write off your expenditure in the first year and get tax relief straight away, as opposed to claiming at different rates, which takes you a lot longer to claim over the years. So this is going to, in my view, give confidence to business owners to invest more in plant machinery equipment to grow their businesses, which means they'll obviously employ more people, they'll buy more goods, they'll hopefully sell more goods or sell services, and at the end of the day they'll end up paying more tax, so it'll be creating a nice circular economy. This is really good news, especially if you're looking to grow your business. Just to make it clear, this applies to any new and unused plant machinery and equipment, and not used plant machinery and equipment. So when you're buying new items, this will apply. Old items, then it's the usual regime. You may or you may not know that HMRC is owed around about £48 billion in unpaid taxes. This includes tax avoidance, possibly tax evasion. So this is a tax gap. It's a lot of money, and 48 billion could solve quite a few of our problems as a country. So what the Chancellor has done is offered £47.2 million to HMRC, and this is partly to assist people or taxpayers with time to pay arrangements. So the HMRC will now have the resource to be able to distinguish between somebody who can afford to pay and doesn't want to pay or wants to pay slowly, and somebody who is suffering hardship. You can also then agree a time to pay arrangement online, so it's going to make it easier for taxpayers, and it's also going to enable HMRC to focus more on collecting debt. But the good news for us is the time to pay arrangement still continues, and HMRC, in fairness to them, have been pretty reasonable with that, and this hopefully will enable them to continue, and people who are struggling at the moment to pay their taxes, and generally struggling, by the way, HMRC will be able to offer them that flexibility going forward. So this is good news. If you can't pay your taxes because your business isn't doing too well, or you've got certain personal circumstances where you haven't got the cash flow, that flexibility will continue. Capital gains tax. The really big one here, I think, is separation and divorce. So if you have a married couple or civil partners and you transfer assets between them, called interspouse transfers, they are done at no gain, no loss for capital gains tax purposes. With the current rules, if a couple separate, then there's no gain, no loss, only works in the year of separation up until the end of that tax year. What the Chancellor has now done is extended that from the 6th of April 2023 for 3 years from the time of separation. So you've got more time now, and I think that's quite good of him. Alongside that, if there is an agreement to separate the assets during the official divorce, then that can be done at any time in the future. There is no time limit on it, again giving people more flexibility, and it makes perfect sense to do that. You wonder why they didn't do that years ago. The other good bit of news is that if one spouse transfers their marital home to their ex-partner, and they were living in that property at some time and are going to keep an interest in that property, then they can still claim private residence relief, and the tax treatment will apply that would have applied at the time that the transfer was made. So again, I think this is flexible, and it's making it easier for people when they're going through a difficult situation in any case, because having the rules where you could only apply the no gain, no loss in the year of separation up until the end of the tax year was very tight, because it takes people a long time sometimes to arrange their affairs when they're going through a divorce, because the last thing on their mind is tax. They've got other issues in terms of how their life is changing, if they've got children, how that's all going to be managed. It's a huge upheaval, and then putting a very tight time pressure on the time limit, I think was very onerous. So this has come late, but it's still welcome news. There's been some changes to rollover relief and PPR in relation to partnerships. So if you have a partnership and if you meet the conditions and the rules, you can roll over your gain and pay the tax when the actual asset is sold, and you can also claim PPR. That wasn't available for limited liability partnerships and Scottish partnerships. I'll do that again. That wasn't available to limited liability partnerships and Scottish partnerships, But from the 6th of April, the rules will apply both for rollover relief and for PPR to LLPs and Scottish partnerships, which again is good news. The cost of childcare and the childcare provision is expensive, but also doesn't work for childcare providers, because the hourly rates don't work, sometimes some of the ratios don't work, and the funding doesn't quite work. So we see in the childcare sector that the availability of staff isn't that great, because that's what I'm being told by people who offer childcare services. I also have an interest in children's day nurseries, so I'm fully aware of that. The government has made some changes. My personal opinion is, to some extent, is too little too late, although they say don't look a gift horse in the mouth. I think this needs to be introduced a lot quicker than it has done, but something is better than nothing for now, but I think this still needs more work to it. So if you have a child from the age of 9 months to 3 years, there's some new changes being brought in for working parents, as long as you earn less than £100,000 a year. So if you have a child which is 2 years old, from April 2024, you'll get 15 hours funded. If you have a child between 9 months to 2 years, you'll get 15 hours from September 2024. And the same age again, 9 months to 2 years, you'll get 30 hours funded from September 2025. The problem is, those dates are quite far away, and people are struggling now, and they don't have the funds to be able to put their children into childcare so that they can work. That's the big problem. So like I said in some of the earlier points, the Chancellor has been pretty reasonable. I think here he's missed the point. What he's also done, which is good although, is increase the ratio from 1 to 4 to 1 to 5 for children that are in childcare, in day nurseries and childminders and other settings. But again, the problem is, it's not just about the ratio. We need better funding, which he said he'll provide, but although he hasn't told us exactly where the money is coming from. We need these measures to come in quickly. So it would have been good if he said from April 2023 these measures are coming in. April 2024 is too far away, and we have a problem now which needs to be dealt with now. So I think we've been shortchanged here a lot, and maybe he might think about it and offer something in between. The other side of the problem is you're asking childcare settings, providers, businesses to accommodate more children, which is fine. Some of them don't have the space, so if they need to create more space, are either looking to extend their premises, use some of their storage space, go up in the attic, wherever they are, providing more space. They need to spend money on that to make it happen. And if you ask a childcare setting to spend, let's say, 30, 40, 50,000 pounds to create more space, well, they haven't got the money, because they are living hand to mouth as a business on very low margins. They can't afford to do that. So I hope when the detail comes out, there's some support from the government to local authorities to support childcare settings with those expansion plans, so that they can support and take on more children, which will allow their parents to seek either part-time or full-time work. That's the solution that we need. Well, the good news for you is that fuel duty has been frozen for the next 12 months. The bad news is that's not going to make much of a difference to most people's lives. So if you look at the ordinary person on the street, their costs have gone up for gas, electric, fuel, rising inflation. Their salaries haven't increased in line with that. More people now are using food banks in this country than there were 12 months ago, 24 months ago, 36 months ago. This is a complete disaster. And what does the Chancellor do? He freezes fuel duty for 12 months. Well, fuel is already unaffordable, okay? And those who need to use fuel will use fuel in any case. So freezing the duty doesn't help. And what's happening on the flip side? Oil and gas companies are making billions in profits. What we really need is a proper windfall tax, and what we need above and beyond that is some kind of limitation on how much these companies can charge people in terms of the profit that they make. Now, I know from a Conservative government they have this particular approach that the state shouldn't interfere, and to some extent that's fine, that's the way that they see the world, but the state should and must interfere when people are struggling to put food on the table, when they are having to go to food banks, when they're having to decide between heating and eating. That just isn't viable in one of the biggest and most prosperous countries in the world. We are one of the largest economies in the world, and we've got people living on food banks, we've got people who can't afford to heat their homes, we've got people who can't afford to eat. That just is untenable, and freezing fuel duty, I'm afraid, just doesn't help. The energy price guarantee has been extended for 3 months, but that's just a kick in the teeth. What's 3 months going to do for people? It's going to take people months, some people years, to get back onto their feet, and freezing or extending the energy price guarantee for another 3 months doesn't do anything for the majority of people who are struggling in real poverty. Again, the Chancellor's shown he's out of touch. He doesn't really care about these people, and I use the word care very carefully because I don't just brandish that around. But 3 months just isn't good enough with all the costs that have gone up, and of those people who are having to remortgage their properties because their mortgage deals have expired, but they're having to pay higher rates of interest now, so that doesn't help them either. So in terms of the real term costs, this just doesn't work, and for some of the other good things that he's done, he's fallen well short here. He should have balanced it better, and I'm afraid this just isn't good enough from my point of view. The OBR, Office for Budget Responsibility, tells us that inflation will reduce from 10.7% to 2.9% by the end of the year, and we're just going to narrowly avoid a recession. Now that's good news, as long as we avoid a recession and inflation comes down, but the costs for people are still going up, and telling them there's good news at the end of the year gives them some hope, but people need support now. So there's been some good support for businesses, by the way, but those businesses, and the majority of them, are small businesses, because we've got just over 5 million small businesses in this country. They are usually businesses run by one person, or they are family-owned businesses who are making enough money just to survive. With all the escalating costs for them personally in their homes, whether it's gas, electric, utilities, fuel costs, increase in overall food costs, increase in finance, mortgage costs, that alongside all the additional costs that they've had to bear for their businesses. And remember, it's not easy for everybody just to say, oh, costs are going up, we're going to increase our prices, because sometimes their customers can't afford to pay the extra, so they're going to lose business. All of that coupled together is making it really, really hard for people to survive. So good news that inflation is predicted and forecast to come down, but I think the Chancellor needs to have a look at this in more detail and offer support to people and businesses, especially small businesses, because what I usually find is they are left behind and are an afterthought. We saw the same during COVID. A lot of people who had limited companies weren't quite offered the same support that some of the other business structures were offered, but that's I think in the past. So all in all, I think and there are many other things in this budget which we're going to cover for you in the end in terms of a list, so you can see all the things being brought in that apply to you as a business owner or a property investor, including some information on real estate investment trusts. But all in all, there are some good changes in terms of the capital allowances regime, good changes in terms of pensions, but there's more to be done. I think this was a huge opportunity for the Chancellor, not just to show his intent, but to actually help people who need it most, both in terms of businesses and individuals. I think overall, all things being equal, without getting political, by the way, he's missed an opportunity, but then knowing how politics works, he's probably going to think of saving, or is thinking of saving, some of the goodies and the sweeties for the next budget, which will probably be his last budget before a general election, because that's how politicians work. They give you all the sweeties just before a general election, so that people are happy and excited and they think the streets are paved with gold and silver, so that they bank more votes. Call me cynical if you like, but that's the way I've seen it for many, many years, and I think that's probably going to happen, but time will tell.